Welcome. My name is Chaumtoli Huq. I'm the editor of Law at the Margins. Happy May Day to everyone around the world. Today we have an exciting panel of guests to discuss with us not only just May Day, but the origins of May Day, which was a general strike for an 8-hour workday. The right to strike, boycotts, wildcat strikes, community organizing, direct actions, are these still viable today? Not just in the labor movement, but what about social justice movements in other contexts? What about in Baltimore, in the uprising? We will hear today from panelists such as internationally renowned political scientist Professor Frances Fox Piven from CUNY Grad Center. We'll hear from worker, leader, organizer in Detroit, Mya Hill, who's part of the Fast Food Forward movement. And we'll also hear from Aaron Amaral, who is a labor lawyer and socialist, and with DC 37. For those of you who are not familiar, Law at the Margins is a social media platform. Its goal is to bring activists, academics, organizers on the ground together to have discussions on issues of the day around law and social justice. So I want to welcome our guests. For articles on May Day, including a video interview with Bangladeshi trade unionists, go to lawatthemargins.com. Please subscribe and follow our future events. So I want to start off with Professor Piven. You've written extensively around social movements and labor movements. The history of May Day, as I mentioned, involved a general strike. Walk us through a history of how strikes and other economic tools of organizing have been used by labor movements or other social justice movements.
Well, the strike reflects a kind of elemental power that ordinary people have in social relations. Social relations are cooperative relations. They reflect the way in which people combine and specialize to produce a social product. When people go on strike, they withdraw from those social relations. They refuse to cooperate. That capacity to refuse is very widespread in society, but it is more potent when the patterns of cooperation are broader and more fragile. So the rise of industrialism made the strike a much more potent and obvious weapon, and working people used it to great effect. One can hardly imagine what industrial capitalist societies would be like if over the decades in which these societies evolved, in which they became more specialized, in which their networks of cooperation expanded, if there had not been the strike power to restrain elites, to restrain economic elites, and to restrain political elites. Now, the great strike movements that we all remember, that we have a kind of almost mythological appreciation of, occurred in the late 19th and the 20th century, up until the end of the 20th century, when a kind of concerted campaign that we call neoliberalism spread around the world to lead working people to think and to feel that their refusal, their withdrawal, no longer mattered because employers and their political allies could simply skip away to another country where working people, were more vulnerable.
So it was a powerful tool. However, in recent times, that tool has been often not in the public favor. And oftentimes when strikes occur, public is begrudgingly negative about them. What happened between the early 20th century to now where strikes became disfavored by the public?
Well, people were always the great public, the audience for the strike. always was ambivalent about strike actions, partly because strikes are socially disapproved and they're often legally disapproved. They're illegal in many situations. And people have a kind of dedication, affection for normal life. That's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is that strikes inconvenience not only employers, but they also inconvenience the people who depend on the schools opening on time, who depend on the milk being delivered. So both the fact that the strike is a defiance of the norms of everyday life and the fact that it produces inconvenience biases publics against the strike to begin with. Nevertheless, people have a capacity for seeing beyond the norms of everyday life, for seeing beyond the inconveniences. And in many situations, community support for strikes has been huge. And I think indeed that in the United States today, the sort of mini strikes associated with the Fight for 15 movement have gotten enormous support. So, the official organs of propaganda always say that the strike, everybody's against the strikers. It's not true that everybody is against the strikers. When workers sat down in the Flint automobile factories, huge numbers of people from adjacent towns turned out to support them. And when in the great railroad strikes of 1877, workers on the Pennsylvania Railroad not only stopped the trains, but derailed the trains and burned the roundhouses. The popular support for those strikes were so huge that the militia was afraid to shoot the strikers. So, the official organs of propaganda always define the strikers as at war with, quote, the community. But there are reasons that people are disgruntled by strikes, but there are also times when there is overwhelming public support for strikers.
Great. I think I'm glad you mentioned the Fast Food 15 campaign. I want to bring in Mya Hill from Detroit at this time. Mya has been organizing the fast food struggle herself. What are your thoughts? I mean, the fast food movement has used strike very effectively. How has been the workers and the public response to your movement, to your organizing? Just general reflections on what we heard from Professor Piven.
In the beginning, people thought that we were outrageous. Soon after, our organization grew due to the off with the testimonies from everybody, from just everyone trying to make it, of course, and then as well, people struggling with having burns and things like that. So with the public hearing the testimonies from workers who live the life every single day, and eventually people began to relate. So people went from "you're crazy" to now knowing that maybe these people actually deserve what they're asking for. And in the beginning, the community, of course, we had a small community that supported us, but now it's more and more people who actually see our side of the story that are willing to support.
Why have you used strikes, a national day of strikes for the fast food movement? You've used in the direct actions. Why have you used these kinds of ways to raise the issues facing fast food workers versus maybe just going to hearings and, talking to your legislators and doing more maybe traditional elective form of organizing?
Well, in order for a dramatic change, you need dramatic actions. And sometimes just going to talk to them, it doesn't always work. Sometimes people don't want to hear what you have to say, and all we want is a seat at the table. So dramatic actions for dramatic change.
I love that. So I want to, at this moment, bring in Aaron to the conversation. And for those who are listening, I want to encourage you to use the Q&A function on the Google chat on the left-hand side if you want to ask our guests any questions. So please, I encourage everyone to use that and to ask questions of our guests. So I want to now move to the public sector, Aaron. You are an attorney with DC 37 in New York. The public sector is restricted by Taylor law. Professor Piven mentioned that laws sometimes restrict the right to strike. And the Taylor law was actually passed in response to strikes by transit union. So how does it restrict public sector employee organizing, and how do public sector employees use economic tools if in light of the Taylor law?
First of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to just thank Law at the Margins. Thank you, Chaumtoli, and say Happy May Day to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with Professor Piven and with Ms. Hill. The fast food workers in particular are really at the forefront of very important work that's happening that's impacting the whole labor movement. With regards to the issue of the Taylor law, it's actually an interesting story. Strictly speaking, the Taylor law, which was passed in the late 1960s, strictly speaking, makes it illegal to strike. And in exchange, the legislation was passed in the aftermath of a series of public sector strikes, but actually represented a more lenient set of labor laws. The previous set had also made strikes illegal, but with even harsher penalties. And there was a trade-off at the time that provided for certain type of what they call tripartite or corporate bargaining setups. So labor would be given a seat at the table. They'd be allowed to maintain aspects of the contract even after a contract had formally expired. There were institutions set up like the Public Employment Relations Board that were set up to adjudicate certain labor issues. So there was an attempt to, within the legal system, address some of the issues that historically arise in the context of labor conflict. One of the really important things to remember about the Taylor law in particular, because in particular in the last 20 years, it's been used and it's seen as a kind of as handcuffs on the labor movement in New York, and there are similar laws throughout the country. Historically, in the first dozen years or 20 years, I want to get this right, in the first 20 years after the passage of the Taylor law, I think there were close to 300 strikes of one sort or another in the context of the labor law. So up until the early 1980s, there were regular ongoing public sector strikes despite the Taylor law. And so there's a bigger question to be asked politically about, you know, the statutory regime has remained the same largely since the late 1960s. However, there was a period of time when strikes were regular and ongoing and actually had public support, and then, you know, starting in the 1980s, that stopped being the case. And so this says there's something more going on than just the existence of the Taylor law.
So what kind of economic tools do public sector unions use? And as you know, Mya mentioned very powerfully, sometimes you need to use strikes and other economic tools to make dramatic change. So what are some other tools that your union or other public sector unions are using?
Well, let me just say initially that I'm speaking in a personal capacity. So I work for AFSCME, I work for DC 37. My comments are in a personal capacity. Honestly, I mean, it's important to note that in other places there remains the right to strike, and there have been very important public sector strikes in this country. Most recently, the Chicago Teachers Union strike, which was profoundly important in a variety of ways. Here in New York, we typically don't use we haven't recently used strike action as a way of gaining leverage. The focus has almost been entirely upon trying to use political levers of power, either through lobbying or through supporting certain candidates, which certainly has a place, but I would argue has had limited and diminishing returns for the labor movement for quite a long time.
Mya, I want to turn back to you to talk about, other than strikes, what other tools, organizing tools, have you used to educate the workers or the public about the conditions in the fast food industry?
Well, first I want to mention our shareholders meeting, which is considerably not a strike. It's more of a let's all get together and tell them about basically. Okay, for example, we do our shareholders meeting at the McDonald's headquarters. When we did that last year, it wasn't a strike. It was just a bunch of us there, and we just wanted to sit at the table. All we wanted is to hear our voice. So with those testimonies and those basically with those testimonies and those smaller actions, which are not strikes, they hear us a lot better. We also have speak outs quite often where we go to a restaurant or things of that nature, and we speak on basically what's the problem. And, educate the people, because a lot of customers, they'll stop and say, oh, no, what's going on? This is a wide group of people, and I'm having a hard time getting my burger. But they'll roll down their window, and they'll hear the testimony, and they say, oh, you know what, my sister goes through that, or my daughter goes through that, or something of that nature. That's a big way to educate the community and others.
So just to follow up, in terms of the shareholder meetings and the speak outs that you mentioned, Mya, the fast food movement and the work that each of you are doing sort of locally has really, I think, in my mind, changed the public's opinion about striking, using these dramatic actions, and it's brought it back almost in public favor. Why do you think it's been so popular? Why do you think people have really responded to the organizing by fast food workers? I mean, what do you think about sort of the positive response? What underlies it?
I honestly think it's because not just the fact that everyone knows someone who works in fast food, but they realize fast food is no longer just for teenagers or after school job. It's people's livelihood, Everyone doesn't have the same advantages as others. Everyone's not cut from the same cloth. So with that, some people do have to depend on fast food as their job, their only job, And some people they don't have the time or the resources to go to college and things of that nature. I went to college and I still ended up in fast food, So overall, yeah, that's about it.
Follow up, Mya. Do you think that that's why people relate to the struggle more? That's the popularity, because the fast food movement has really gained a lot of popularity amongst a broad sector, and is that why it's gained that popularity? Like people can relate to the workers in the movement?
Well, that as well, they can relate, and also because what people don't see is that if our pay went up, if we gained a union and things of that nature, then it should motivate others to renegotiate their contract with their union or go to their boss and say, okay, I think it's about time for maybe a raise or a change or things of that nature. So I think that's why it's gained so much popularity, because if we can step to the table and say, okay, this is what we need as fast food workers, it should motivate others to step to the table and say, okay, well, we work hard too. Is there a way we can as well step up our pay?
Professor Piven, I want to bring you back into the conversation around, we focused around strike. That's one economic tool. What are other economic tools? You've written about the importance of disruption and challenging authority in a lot of your work as essential to social movements. Can you speak to what are other economic tools social movements have used? What are some current social movements that are using these disruptive activity?
Well, first, the strike is the most important form of disruption, but it doesn't just occur in the workplace. When people withdraw cooperation in patterns of social life, they're striking. When they don't go to school, they're striking. When if domestic workers, for example, were to refuse to come and take care of the children of the upper middle class women who now populate the executive offices of Wall Street and Madison Avenue, they're striking. And the strike, I think, is an essential and universal strategy for people at the bottom end of social relations to exercise power. Nevertheless, it's also true that the strike has to be defended. It has to be protected. It's very easy for elites to say that strikers are unruly, disruptive, violent, this, that, and therefore it's important that strikers have public support. And much of what working class groups have tried to do over the years to defend the strike is to build that community support. That was what was so distinctive about the Chicago teachers' strike. They had prepared for the strike by developing, nourishing their relations with the community so that when they did walk out and the kids couldn't go to school, that's very inconvenient, isn't it? Nevertheless, the community supported them because the community understood the commonalities that they had with the teachers. Now, a little while ago, we were talking about, well, why are people more sympathetic to fast food workers than they were, say, 25 years ago when everybody was saying, oh, they're just kids. They don't need a decent living wage. Why are they more sympathetic now? Well, I think it's because inequalities have become so extreme and they affect such broad swaths of the population. It's no longer the case that the working class, you can put that in quotes because most of us work, the working class is well off, protected by unions, and it's only the poor who are protesting. Now, the working class has lost so much ground as inequalities have spiraled, as wages have stagnated and fallen, that I think a lot of people are prepared to be sympathetic with those who sort of grab the situation and fight for their rights and walk out, use the great classic weapon of the strike.
I want to ask you the same question I asked Mya. You mentioned a little bit, which is that the strike has come back there's a greater sympathy now because of the increased inequality. I want to turn, and I also want to underscore your point that the strike or these tools of direct action is not just in the labor movement. I want to turn our attention a little bit to Baltimore and Ferguson on the racial justice movement. There's been a lot of conversation around the rioting, the violence, and what can we learn from what you've sort of seen historically in understanding Baltimore, what's happening in Baltimore. I wonder if you can shed some light on that since the focus is also on broader social movements.
Well, I think that there is a relationship between the Fight for 15 movements and the Black Lives Matter movements, the protests. What's so striking about Baltimore, or before that Ferguson, or the protests that erupted in so many cities around the Black Lives Matter slogan, what's so striking about it is the welling up of defiance and disgust at the abuse of young blacks by the police all over the country. But those people, that population, has a lot of links with the population that works in those fast food franchises or those fast food chains. Those are sort of the same people, or they're the friends of the same people, the kin of the same people. And sure, one of the grievances of young blacks, and it's such a justifiable grievance, is the wanton use of the police power against young minorities. But another grievance is that they can't earn a living, that they work for minimum wages, which cannot by any stretch of the imagination pay for rent and food, allow people to establish families, and so on. So there's a deep, profound link between the kinds of injustices that are being addressed by each of these movements, or maybe they're two sides of the same movement. And I think we all ought to be so relieved, so energized by the fact that great numbers of young people, especially minorities, but not just minorities, in the United States, are finally discovering the power of the protest movement. And the power of the protest movement is the strike.
I really appreciated this notion that we have to nurture and support and build communities that support the right to strike. I just want to underscore that. I want to encourage folks to ask the questions using the Q&A function. They can tweet their questions using the hashtag #LawTheMargins. I want to turn to Aaron. I know that you're, outside of being a lawyer, are also an activist. And I wanted to get your reflections in terms of what are we seeing today around social movements and these kind of strikes, these boycotts, the different kinds of economic tools that are being used. I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your reflections? Do you see some trends? Do you see some patterns? And if you can sort of link it to the way in which law is not supporting those trends, or can support, that would be helpful as well.
Sure. I want to sort of pick up where Professor Fox Piven ended, which is the relationship between the Black Lives Matter movement, the struggles within the black community against police violence, in a whole number of sectors actually around the criminal injustice system, and how it relates to what we're talking about with regards to the centrality of strike and strike action. Historically, there's no question that the struggles of the black community for civil rights, which continue to this day and very much manifest in the struggles against police violence, against police murder, the community eruptions in Ferguson and in Baltimore, have really led the way for social movements in the U.S. historically. That's been true for hundreds of years, and it remains true today. For those of us who are out protesting recently in solidarity with Baltimore, we saw a significant increase here in New York City of police repression. We've seen the police repression certainly in Ferguson and absolutely in Baltimore, obviously where the communities are directly trying to respond. And it raises some very important strategic questions about how we can respond in a situation in which the law in many ways is not on our side. The police continue to act violently against us. The mainstream media and politicians attempt to criminalize and attempt to delegitimize the actions of the protesters. And I think this is where it becomes very important for connections to be made very explicitly. That is that the social power of people rests, as a professor was saying, in withdrawing their cooperative power. And so the actions of the fast food workers and the possibility. Look, the situation in Baltimore. There have been these unbelievable statistics about education and the defunding of education, that 95% of the students in Baltimore receive free breakfast, free lunch, speaks to the level of poverty. There's a real possibility, which we saw in the Chicago Teachers Union, of bringing together the struggles of public sector workers, the struggles of workers generally, around the issues that are directly facing the community. The slogan of the Chicago Teachers Unions during their strike was, our teaching conditions are your children's learning conditions. And it was, that slogan sort of encapsulated some of what allowed them to draw connections and draw support. I think there's a question for the movements in the streets right now that are leading the struggle, around police violence and generally the civil rights movement in the Black community, about what strategically we can do to take us forward beyond just showing up in the streets, which is important. And I think this issue of drawing together, our economic power and trying to use the unions, trying to use coalitions with people in their work, people doing the public sector work, becomes very important. In particular, because these are in the public sector, you're talking about a population that is overwhelmingly in New York City and in the metropolitan areas people of color. These are people who come from the communities that they're serving. There's natural alliances to be made, and these are really important strategic questions that we need to be asking to take all our movements forward.
We have a question. I'm not entirely sure, based on your respective backgrounds, who to direct it to, but I'll ask it, and if Aaron, you can answer it, maybe I can start with you, which is, how does technology help in the right to strike? Is there anything called digital striking? Can we harness social media in a way to help some of our economic tools of strike, direct action, teach-ins, sit-ins? Is this something that you're familiar with? And also want to open it up to others, Professor and Mya, digital striking.
I'll be brief. I don't have particular expertise in this area, but I will say that the exponential growth of video in people's pockets, the existence of social media as an ability to broadcast, opens up fantastic opportunities for the movements as a whole. At the same time, I think it's important. It can be a double-edged sword. We don't want to mistake, internet activism with, other types of work, which is more directly confronting, the state and the people that are the ruling classes who are trying to sort of maintain, structures of neoliberalism.
Actually, so we're going to slowly wind down. I think that was a good sort of response. I think Law at the Margins, just as a plus, since we do use technology and social media, but nothing replaces, and I want to echo Aaron's point, social movement activity, connectivity person to person on the ground, and building up institutions for working people and for communities that are oftentimes marginalized by the law. And that's the whole purpose of Law at the Margins, is to create a culture and a space for that. So I want to wind down and start with Mya in terms of if there are any points that we haven't covered in our discussion that you think that the audience should know about your own organizing, about this topic around May Day. Just want to get each of you to share some concluding thoughts, and just starting off with Mya.
Well, I would kindly like to leave our listeners knowing that we're only asking for $15 an hour plus the right to form a union without retaliation. We're not asking to get rich. We're not asking to buy Bentleys. We're asking to live, to survive, to no longer struggle. And as well, while people are very worried about the $15 an hour, we're also very worried about our union too, because we need benefits as well. We work hard. We're hard workers. We are the working community. We deserve more. Thank you.
Just a follow-up. if people want to get involved in the Fight for 15, also there's a lot of issues. I hope we can come back to talk about Detroit in terms of outside of the labor movement, a lot of the community stuff. But how can people get involved with the Fight for 15? Let us know how could they get involved. How could a non-fast food worker show support to the organizing?
Okay, well, you can always go to social media, of course, Facebook, Fight for 15, Detroit 15. As well, we have the fightfor15.org. Those are 3 direct links where you can find us at. And the fightfor15.org and the Fight for 15, those are not just for Detroit, that's for all over completely. Every different region has their own. So you'll find the region organization with the Fight for 15 on the website and on the Facebook page.
I'm going to ask Aaron any concluding thoughts, and then and we'll end. We began with Professor Piven, and we'll end with some thoughts from her. But Aaron, concluding thoughts, things we haven't covered in our discussion that you think that listeners should be aware of, and then also, how could folks be involved in the struggles you think that are important? Any groups that you want to mention?
Well, let me just say I think it's important for people to realize in this country that the struggles that we're facing, although specific to the history of this country, are really shared by people throughout the world. I've done a lot of work recently in solidarity with the movement in Greece. So there are people throughout the world are very much, in a joint struggle against the reality that we're facing here of neoliberalism, and so we're not alone, and we should recognize that. I think it's important right now. I think in particular the struggle in Baltimore and the continuing struggles arising out of Ferguson represent a real opportunity, and we need to do all that we can to broaden the support and change the sort of mainstream narrative around that struggle. This is a historic, really historic moment that we haven't seen in decades, and we have to take advantage of it. Again, I just want to thank everybody and wish everybody happy May Day.
Thank you. Professor Piven, right to strike, social movements. What are some concluding thoughts that you'd like to share, and how can we get folks involved?
Well, I think the importance of this moment, which Aaron underlined, ought to be dwelt upon, because people do not rise up. They do not strike. They do not take the risks that are involved in the strike, especially strikes that are made illegal by the machinations of politicians and lawyers. They don't take things into their own hands and brave the reprisals that come in the wake of refusing to work, refusing to go to school, refusing to get off the streets. They don't do that easily. And what underlies these new movements, which are occurring not just in the United States, but are occurring across Europe and throughout Latin America, what underlies this is the deep, broken promises of our society, of capitalist societies, that have come in the wake of what we call neoliberalism. And neoliberalism in this sense is just the hyper-capitalism of the last few decades. There were certain promises that were made for being a citizen, for being a worker, for minding your own business, for taking care of your kids, for going to work every day, for grinding along. The promises had to do with you could live your life, you could have a little bit of the gloss of a consumer society, you could raise your children would go to work in the factory that you went to work in, and you could respect your parents and take care of your parents in their role. You could do all that. Now you can't do it anymore. Now you're losing your homes in the United States because of mortgage foreclosures. Now Social Security recipients are being garnished for the debts of their grandchildren, incurred so that they could go to school. And what was the promise of going to university? The promise was that you would be able to get ahead in this society, that you would be able to have that little home and raise. Those promises are being broken on a huge scale, and very aggressive, a very predatory kind of capitalism, a financialized capitalism, is not only taking larger shares of what is produced today, but they're taking back, clawing back the goods and protections that people have won over the decades. They're trying to claw back Social Security. They're trying to claw back the houses that people invested in every month by paying the mortgage. They're trying to claw back education. And people are reacting to that, and thank God that they are. Because, you know, our only hope of preserving what we have of a democratic and social community is in the protest movements.
Great. I want to thank each of our guests. I want to thank Mya, Aaron, Professor Piven for participating in this conversation on May Day around right to strike and also about social movements generally. Each of you have given your labor and love today, your patience and your understanding, and for that, I'm very thankful. I also want to thank behind the scenes Elbert Garcia, who's been kind of hosting this chat. And in Detroit, I want to thank Darcy McConnell. Because of her, Mya was able to participate in this conversation, and so you can't see Darcy, but she made this happen, and I think oftentimes those who are invisible need to be acknowledged and respected. I am a labor lawyer as well, so again, I want to thank everyone. There is an event page. If there are any follow-up questions, you can post it there, and I will post it to the guests. I will share all of the organizations that our guests mentioned. Please come back to Law at the Margins. Subscribe to learn about future events and future chats. Read about articles around labor, law, and social movements. And again, I want to thank each of you for participating in what I think is really important conversation. And I hope that we can all support and nurture the right to strike that each of us have. Thank you, and happy May Day.
Happy May Day to you, and thank you.
Happy May Day.